Okay, Igor, you think you can get the introduction right this time?
Don't you worry about a thing, Professor.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Hey, hi everyone, welcome to the show, Bandlab, with your host, me, the Professor. Sorry about that, I was just expecting something really horrible to happen, but apparently, Igor is on the ball today. I gotta thank him. Oh, quick, Igor, the fire extinguisher. Okay, I think we got everything. Oh, man. Hey everyone, welcome to the lab. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, a few technical difficulties, but all under control now. Today we'll be working with Bandlab Sampler, and for those of you that don't know what a sampler is, it's basically a device that we can load up with short audio clips, samples, and trigger them using pads, in the case of a hardware device like this, or if we're using a software sampler like Bandlab's, some sort of controller or a sequencer. I happen to have a MIDI controller here, so I'll be demonstrating that, and we'll be using Bandlab's built-in MIDI editor to trigger a few samples as well. Now these samples can be pretty much any audio clips that you want. They can be ones you record yourself, ones that you download from the internet, as long as you have the rights to use them. It can be music, it can be sound effects, people talking, animals, ambient sounds, whatever you want, and you combine them, and hopefully you can mix them up and combine them in a way that sounds musical. So we'll see what we can do about that, and I guess the best way is to hop right into it and start our demonstration. Okay, so I've got a demo project here that I set up, and down here I've got my MIDI controller. It's turned off right now, so I'm just going to turn it on, and when I do, Bandlab should automatically detect it, and it does, which is great. So we're ready to get going. Now before I go through these tracks I've already created, I'm just going to demonstrate how we actually go about using the sampler. It's really easy. Add track, and we select sampler, and that's it. We're ready to go. Now if we come down to the bottom left here and click on sampler, what you'll see is the sampler itself. Now the sampler is really just the pads, 16 of them, and these pads map to, if you have a controller, they'll map to your controller. If not, you can map them yourself. We're not going to demonstrate that this episode, how to actually configure your MIDI mappings, but it is possible by clicking here just really quickly to specify what control on your controller will trigger any particular control in Bandlab. That'll be another episode. For now, we're just going to hope that everything works out of the box. Alright, so this is your sampler. And by default, you're provided with a brand new one. None of the pads are assigned. Sampler kit is named custom, but you can come in here and there are a whole bunch of pre-defined kits available for you. These combine different percussion, melodic instruments, other sounds in different ways, and well, why don't we take a look at one? I'm just going to grab one at random, this one here. So here's what you see. The pads, you can assign up to 4 colors to the pads, depending on, well, it's up to you really, the sound that you have associated with it, or what group it's in, because we can also group pads. I'll explain that. What you see on the right here is the actual waveform of your sample for the selected pad, and we can play them just by clicking on them with the mouse. You'll see each pad has a number or letter over it. We can trigger the pad using the computer keyboard, the corresponding key on the computer keyboard, if we don't have a controller. Now if we do, as I said, the pads will trigger them. Most controllers should work out of the box. If not, and you're lucky enough to have a controller that you can configure, basically the pads send the notes beginning with this low C note, the first 16 notes of the keyboard. That would be note 36 and upwards if we're talking about MIDI note numbers, but it is configurable. But for now, we're not going to bother. As I said, we're just going to hope it works out of the box. And if not, we can go into the MIDI editor and just like we did with MIDI drums in the previous episode, we can just come in here and create our own sounds and play them back. We're not going to work with any of the built-in samplers though. You can create your own and save them. So you'll see those under My Kits, and right now you'll see I have a sampler named None. It doesn't mean I don't have any samples. Yeah, I'm weird when it comes to picking names for things, I know. I'm going to demonstrate this set of pads later on. But for now, let's start from scratch again. I'm going to delete this track. And we're going to create a brand new one. One way we can use a sampler that seems kind of intuitive, I guess, because it is triggered with pads, is as a percussion device, some sort of drum machine. So now we have the option to actually use Bandlab's built-in sound samples. We could use loops or one-shots, even though by default it takes you to one-shots. You're not limited to them. You can load an entire loop onto a pad if you want. But I'm just going to come to the one-shots. I'm going to pick, say, a hi-hat, I don't know, rock, or yeah, rock metal, why not? So here's a hi-hat. I'm just going to put it on any random pad. And if we play it, you hear it plays. Let me try something else, maybe a kick drum. So here's a kick drum. There we go. And to round things out, I'll grab a snare. And here's a snare. So pad 4 is the hi-hat, pad 5 kick, pad 6 snare. I can come in here and you see the pads that are assigned are not grayed out. It's not as intuitive as using the MIDI editor for drums because we don't know what's assigned to each pad. That's because it's customizable. So it would be nice if we could rename them, but we can't, so we got to work with what we got. So I'm just going to come in here and really quickly set my, well, it's set to 16th notes, I guess. That's good enough. And I'm just going to also come in here and link zoom. What that does is links the two panes so that when I zoom one, the other one zooms as well. It kind of helps to keep track of things. So if we remember correctly, there's our hi-hat. I'm just going to throw a few hi-hat beats in. And I believe 5 was our kick drum. There we go. And if you don't remember, you can just click there and get a reminder. And here's our snare. And I meant to move that, easy to move. So there we go. We have ourselves a simple beat. And I can just expand that and we're good to go. So you see, you can use it as a drum machine. Works essentially the same way. The only difference is because we have access to the MIDI editor, we can tweak the sound a little bit, we can play with the dynamics and even the rhythm slightly. We can create more complex rhythms because we have access to the quantize feature, and we can play even 16th notes or 32nd notes. So it's a little bit more versatile, even if we just limit ourselves to drums. And there's a huge selection of beats available that we can choose from there as well. So that's example 1. Next example, I'm going to show you something that's a little bit more complicated, and we're going to get to that in a sec. Okay, so before we move on, I just want to do one last thing here, and that is demonstrate how we can record our own samples. Pretty easy. You select an empty pad. If you don't have any empty pads, you can just right click on one and delete. The pad's gone. We're going to put it back for now though. So yeah, I'm just going to grab one here and hit record, and I'm going to record myself saying something random. All right, so something random. There we go. Now, one of the things you'll notice is that something random. It only plays while I'm holding down the mouse button here, or in the case of the keyboard, it would be the keyboard, like that.
So why is that? Well, that's because by default, the play mode that you see here is set to gate. What gate means is that, as you saw, it will only play while the trigger random is being triggered, depressed, usually if it's a pad or a key of some sort. So if we want the entire sample to play every time, regardless how long we press the pad for, something random, then we would choose one shot. That way, something random. I just click on it and it'll play the whole thing. And lastly, we have loop, which is the same as gate in that it only plays while you're pressing the pad, but it'll play multiple times until you release it. So those are our basic options, and depending on how you want the sample to behave, one will work better than the other. Now, you have these little handles here that you can slide around if you want to trim off any parts that you don't want. You'll notice Bandlab automatically trimmed the beginning because there wasn't any sound there really other than background noise. It was smart enough to detect that, so it did a little bit of work for me, which was nice of it. And there's some trailing sound here that we could clip if we wanted to. And I'm going to put it back to one shot, something random. You still hear everything. So now if you trim off a lot from a sample, you may not have a large area to work with. We can always come here to the pad, right click, select crop, and that'll remove the parts that we've hidden. So we can get in closer. Just to go over some of the other controls here. Volume is pretty self-evident. We may want some of the samples to be louder than others, so we can adjust the volume relative to each other. Pad, where in the stereo field you want it. By default, it's centered. We can move it left or right. And double clicking on the control will reset it to its default value. And this is true pretty much anywhere in Bandlab, by the way. And pitch, we can adjust the pitch of the recorded sample up to an octave one way or the other. But something to bear in mind, as you can hear there, it doesn't only affect the pitch, it affects the speed as well. That's effectively how it changes the pitch, by speeding up or slowing down the sample. So that's something to bear in mind. If you slow it down or lower it an octave, you're effectively cutting the speed in half. And vice versa, you raise it an octave, you're doubling the speed. Attack is basically a fade in. We can kind of ease the volume in if it starts very something random. Something random. Something random. So you see it fades in. And this is good if you have something that just kind of jumps out at you. And release is pretty much the opposite. It'll something random. If we have the sample set to gate, something random. You see, if I have a long release, it'll keep playing something random for a certain period of time after I release the trigger. So it'll kind of fade out, because it's usually a little bit more natural to have a note just fade out, even if it's quickly, rather than just stop dead. And we have a tone control, basically a high pass or low pass filter, so we can affect the tone. And those are our options. Now if we right click on the pad, we can select a different color for it. And again, this really depends on you, how you want to assign colors. Normalize will adjust the volume so that the loudest parts are at 0 dB. This is one way to get all your samples at the same overall level. And this is good for samples that are recorded at a low level, actually. Crop, we've gone over already. Reverse, well, that reverses the sample. And maybe if we lower the pitch, I don't know. And yeah, we have copy, paste, and good old delete. So these are the different things we can do essentially. We can grab a file from disk if you have something you want to use, and we've already gone through the one-shots. So now we're going to actually start creating our own samples, proper ones, and I've kind of gone to the liberty of doing a little bit of the work ahead of time, and I am going to be right back.
Okay, so I've got this little gizmo here. It's actually my wife's. It's called a tongue drum. You play it with these mallets. it sounds really nice if you can actually play it. It's kind of tricky. You really have to hit everything in the sweet spot, and it takes a little bit of skill and practice to play this thing. So it's basically a C major pentatonic scale. There's 6 notes here: C, D, E, G, A, and another C an octave above the first. And I thought this would be a good candidate for sampling. So I went ahead and I recorded all 6 notes, and you'll hear them here. I'm not going to play all 6 of them. You'll have to take my word for it. But you can see there's 6 notes. And what I did then was I exported this track as a WAV file. And then I created a new track, and that's this track here that you're going to see right now. And I created all these pads. So the way I create them, I'm just going to demonstrate here really quickly. Now we have the option to import a file into a pad, and since I exported this, I can just drag it directly into the pad. And that's exactly what I did. So here you see all 6 notes. I'm going to set that to 1 shot. And you're not hearing it now because the track is muted. So if I unmute it. So this is our original WAV file. So what I did then was I made a few copies of it and trimmed each one so that it contained only 1 note. So first pad here contains the first note, the C. Second one contains the D, E, and so on. Now you'll notice there's actually more than 6 notes. I'm going to delete this because we don't need it anymore. That was just for demonstration purposes. So that's how I got the pads. And essentially what I did was just as I demonstrated before. I just trimmed the beginning and ends, and that was it. So there's my C. Now you'll see some of them are set as gates. Actually, they're all set as gates, but with different releases. We won't worry about that for now. So there's our notes. Now, I thought it would be interesting to actually have a full scale rather than just a pentatonic scale. So I went and added some extra notes. Now you may be wondering why I have these particular paths chosen. The reason for that is, if you remember on the keyboard, when my keyboard goes into standby, it goes into this light show thing, nothing to worry about. So the first pad is triggered by the C note on my keyboard, the second pad by a C sharp, third pad by D, and so on, going up the scale. So I thought it would make a lot of sense to have the pads assigned to the actual notes that produce that note. So this is assigned to the C note. I skip the C sharp, and the second note is assigned to D. Next one is assigned to E, because I skipped the D sharp. And this F note I created myself, and basically what I did, I grabbed this note here, the E, made a copy of it. You can either just right-click copy, and then I'm just going to paste it up here for now. Right-click paste. There's our original E note, and then I just come in here and shift the pitch up 1 semitone, and it becomes F. And if we play it now, it's that note there. So that's all I did. That's how I produced my F note, and you'll see it's up 1 semitone. Here's my G, A, B, C, and the B note I created the same way, except I took the C note and lowered it a semitone. Why did I do that and not take the A and raise it? If you remember, changing the pitch also changes the speed, and the more you change the pitch, the more unrealistic it starts to sound. So I try to keep the pitch changes to a minimum, so I prefer going down a semitone rather than going up 2 semitones. That's all. So that's how that was done. And now I've got a full scale. I can play an actual song now if I wanted to. I'm not going to attempt it because I'm going to embarrass myself. What I'll do instead is play something that I had recorded earlier using this sample. I'm just going to unmute it, and here's how it sounds. Okay, so that was it. You'll notice there's a note missing, and that missing note would be somewhere over here where there's a B note, which is lower than the C that I have on my keyboard, so I didn't include it. I could have just placed it some random spot on any pad to fill it in, but I didn't. It's just a demonstration. So there we go. We've used the sampler to create basically a custom instrument. Now if I want to, I can go in here and save this kit, and I can name it tongue drum, and from this point onwards it'll be available in any project where I want to use it, and I never actually have to learn to play it. All I have to be able to do is come into the MIDI editor and select the pads I want to play, and we're done. Alright, so that's one way to use the sampler, and I'm going to demonstrate one more right after we come back. Alright, so to wrap things up, I'm just going to do one last demonstration. And I'm going to come here and again create a new sampler track. And this time I am going to use my saved kit here, none. Now to create this kit, basically what I did, I grabbed my guitar behind me and I recorded myself strumming a G chord down and also a G chord upwards. Why two different G chords? Because they sound different. It would be nice to mix them up. On top of that, I took a tambourine that I have somewhere behind me, recorded myself shaking it and hitting it. And I have these, well, they're Newfie spoons. Yeah, so I recorded myself hitting it against my palm and hitting it against my knee. So, I don't know what these, yeah, we're not going to use those. Okay, so now basically, I have what I need here to create a little simple tune, I guess. And to demonstrate, I'll start with the guitar. But before I do that, I want to explain something here. And that is, you see the pads are color-coded, and that's because I've grouped them. And the reason I've grouped them, what happens when you group pads together is that anytime you hit one of the pads in the group, it'll mute any other pads that are currently playing. So only one within a group can play at any given time. Why would you want to do this? There are a few reasons. One of them would be you're trying to emulate a monophonic instrument, one that only plays one note at a time. Anytime you play a note, any notes that are currently playing would have to stop. So that's one way. Another is if you have an instrument that has a few different modes of operation, say a hi-hat. You can play a hi-hat open or you can play it closed. If you have two different hi-hat samples, one of each, you expect one to kill the other when it plays. You can't have an open hi-hat and a closed hi-hat playing on the same kit at the same time. So one should mute the other. So that's one reason why you want to join things into the same group. So that's what I've done here. I've combined the two guitars into one group because anytime you strum, any existing chords that are playing are going to get killed and replaced with whatever you're strumming currently, even if it happens to be the same note or same chord. Likewise, tambourine, if I hit the tambourine, whatever sound was produced when I was shaking it stops. And here too, spoon can only make one sound at a time, one or the other. So that's how I've done that. Also, you'll see that some of these are set as gate, which I've done with the guitar, because the guitar, generally you strum a chord, you're going to hold it for as long as you want to hold it, and it doesn't actually stop playing until you release
the strings or intentionally mute it or play another chord. So you want it to play for as long as you hold the chord, but we can cut it short if we want to. On the other hand, something like, say, the tambourine, I set as a one-shot, because once you hit it, it'll sound until it dies away. On the other hand, the shaking, as long as you're shaking it, it'll keep producing sound. As soon as you stop shaking it, it dies away. I put the release kind of high for the tambourine because those little cymbal things on the tambourine don't stop the second you stop shaking it. They go on for a little longer. So it sounds more realistic if you don't cut it off. This is what would happen if there was no release. That's not how a tambourine sounds. So I put it up to, I don't know, 2, 3, 400, whatever you think sounds good. That sounds good to me. And yeah, likewise, these are both set to gates. So now I can come in here and go into the MIDI editor, and I'm just going to set up a little simple guitar strumming pattern. So pad 4 is the guitar strumming down, pad 5 is the guitar strumming up. And I am just going to come back here then. So pad 4, let me just zoom in a bit so we can get a better view. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to put together a simple strumming pattern if I can get this guy out of my hand. How about this? Okay, so let's hear how that sounds. That doesn't sound bad at all, I guess. Sounds like a guitar. Now, you're probably wondering, now, first of all, one thing to remember when we're entering notes like this with the MIDI editor, everything is going to be at full volume, 127 velocity, which isn't really going to sound natural. So we could play with that. We can play with some of the other settings, the humanize and so on, and the dynamics, and try to get it to sound a little bit more like a real guitar player. But at least it sounds like a real guitar. And you see we're clipping there, and that's because this guitar is so loud. So I'm just going to highlight everything and bring the volume down to a reasonable level, say about 99 looks good. Okay, that sounds a lot better. And one of the things you'll notice if you listen really closely, you actually hear the pick hitting the strings. So it's very realistic sounding, which it should be because it's a real guitar recorded with a real microphone played by a real player. And you're probably asking, yeah, well, why can't I just use Bandlab's built-in MIDI instruments and use the guitar there? And you can, obviously, if you don't have a guitar available to record your own samples, or can't find any good guitar samples online, and I'm sure you can. Yeah, that's always an option. And for demonstration purposes, I actually came here and created, sorry, let me just highlight this track, there we go, and created an acoustic guitar. And you see, if I solo that, it sounds like a guitar. So I came here and I recorded the same strumming pattern. And you see it's a little bit more complicated here because I have to know the actual notes in the chord and figure out where they fall on a guitar and translate them to a piano keyboard. But it's doable, and yeah, if we listen to it, here's what it sounds like. So that's what it sounds like if we're using the built-in instrument. And this is what it sounds like when we use my samples. It sounds a little bit more like a guitar. And yeah, I could have looped this out a little bit so that, and you'll notice the MIDI is louder than mine, and the reason it's louder than mine is because just as with the guitar, Everything is at full volume, 127. So I'm just going to come in here and do the same thing I did with the guitar. Put it down to about 99, so we're comparing apples to apples. And now we can see how they sound relative to each other. So again, this is the guitar. And this is the MIDI instrument. Okay, so why the big difference? One of them is, depending on how Bandlab's MIDI instrument sounds are produced, the sample quality may not be the greatest, and in all likelihood there's some synthesis going on there. The individual notes may sound real, but when you combine them, they don't really resonate the way they do when you play those multiple notes on the guitar and have the body contributing to the sound and so on. The other thing is, when you're strumming your guitar, if you're strumming down, you're hitting the low notes before the high notes. Strumming up, you're hitting the high notes before the low notes. MIDI, you're hitting all the notes at exactly the same time, so it sounds more like you're plucking the strings and strumming them. You can work around this. You can go in and adjust the individual notes. And if I really zoom out here and turn off the snap to grid, I can, for instance, just drag some of these notes ever so, oops, that was too much, ever so slightly in, so they're not playing at the same time, and it'll sound a little bit more realistic. And likewise, where I'm strumming up, I would do the same thing, except the higher pitched notes would be playing before the lower pitched ones. Not all the notes on the guitar play at exactly the same volume, and again, depending on what direction you're strumming, lower pitched notes may be louder when you're strumming down, higher pitched notes may be louder when you're strumming up. So again, making these kind of adjustments, which can be kind of tedious when you're working with MIDI like this, will give you a more realistic sound, and also not having everything perfectly aligned to the grid. But it's a lot of work. On the other hand, sample, all you have to do is play the chord once and use it as many times as you want. Again, it may not be as the same as having a real guitar player play through an entire song, but it's the next best thing. Okay, so I think we've got that out of the way. So that was just to demonstrate how to use the guitar itself and compare it to what we could have done using the built-in guitar. And now I am just going to show this sample here, or example. And this again uses our same little pad setup, except I've combined all the different instruments so that you can hear how they sound together when all played at once. And basically this is what you get. Okay, it's not going to win any Grammy Awards or anything, but you get the idea. It was really easy to put together. If we go into the MIDI editor here, you'll see that it's just a few basic pads being played, different combinations at the same time. And you see I played with the volume, the different shading in the green gives you an indication, and some of the notes are a little bit off the grid, again, to make it seem a little bit more human. And I just used the built-in humanize feature here to do that. As far as the guitar strumming goes, likewise, I cut a few of the chords a little bit short, offset them. And again, these are little things that kind of just make it sound less machine-like. You don't have to do this, obviously. This is just something I want to do because it's fun. Okay, I think that pretty much covers everything. Well, not everything. There's a heck of a lot more you can do using the sampler, but I think this gives you a good general idea of what the options are. So yeah, we're just gonna head over back to the final screen and wrap things up. Okay, so I think that covers all the basics as far as working with a sampler. Obviously, there's a lot more you can do. You're only limited by your imagination. And the project we're working on is available from my Bandlab site. If you want to experiment with that, feel free to do so. It's workable. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Plenty more videos to come. Next episode, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on using the MIDI controller. And we'll be actually recording some MIDI rather than just working with the MIDI editor. So until then, I think that takes care of everything. So from Igor and myself, take care, and we'll see you the next episode. Igor, you're supposed to be in the control room. Can you go take care of that? And while you're at it, pick up your mess. Anyway, bye.